Anything that I can drill a hole in the bottom can become a planter.
The rhododendrons are great for wildlife. The bumblebees, the tiger swallowtails.
When we did move here, this was just a hay field.
When you're out deadheading, it gives you that inner peace. If it's a bad day, get out in the garden.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Great Gardening. I'm your host, Sharon Yung, and as usual, we have our garden experts with us. They are horticulturist and educator Bob Olen and garden professional Byrns Erickson. As a note to our viewers, Great Gardening will return on June 8th for an hour-long special. So, with a couple weeks away coming up, we want to answer as many questions from gardeners tonight as we can. Volunteers from the St. Louis County Master Gardeners Program are here to answer the phones when you call in. Dial 218-788-2847 or call toll-free at 1-877-307-8762. Or you can email us at ask@pbsnorth.org. Let's take a look at some signs of the season. Spring has sprung, finally.
Finally, and look at these. The daffodils are magnificent this year, and you know, if you want to just put something in the ground that's deer resistant, that's winter hardy, these happen to be some I planted 30 years ago, and they give us a tremendous bloom every single year, and they're vibrant right now. And of course, the first veggie of the season, rhubarb is up. Now when they're buds, we had this question last week, they're vulnerable to deer pressure right as they're emerging, but at this point, once we got leaves up there, the deer leave them alone as well, and they're just day to day, they're just expanding dramatically. And it won't be long. These are going to be our flowering crab buds. They're just beginning to emerge. You can see the buds there. It's going to be magnificent bloom because all the moisture we had last fall and this spring, so we can look forward to that. And the blueberry buds are up there too, so it won't be long before the pollinators will be out there and doing their thing on blueberries. So they're magnificent. Everything's coming. We're looking forward to a great, great growing season.
Good. Well, last summer, we visited Mandy McDonald in Hermantown, Minnesota. She operates Rusty Patch Natives, which grows native plants for pollinators and other wildlife. Let's take a look at her garden.
I'm Mandy McDonald and I live in Hermantown, Minnesota. I own Rusty Patch Natives. I started the business 2021 and I grow and I sell plants for pollinators and habitat for other critters to try to restore the habitat for them that's been lost. Here we have a garden that I planted last summer. We have some anise hyssop here, or blue giant hyssop, one of the favorites for the bees. Behind that we have early sunflower. We have some switchgrass. This is great habitat for the birds in the winter, and they also like to eat the seeds. And it adds interest in the winter when everything else is dead. This is some beard tongue, and the bees and hummingbirds were really loving this the last month. It was one of their favorites. Okay, so this is another garden that I created last year, and this is my wet garden. So the soil here is very wet and heavy, and there are certain plants that like that, and this is one of them. This is blue vervain. This is one of my favorite plants. The bees love it right now. This is doing wonderful here because it likes that heavy, wet soil. This is another bee magnet. It's called fringe loosestrife. It's a native loosestrife. Some calico aster, not in bloom yet. Some orange coneflower, just about to bloom. And then this one right here is a really good pollinator plant again, and it likes the more moist soils also. This is Virginia mountain mint. And there's a few different mountain mints. This one gets a little taller, about like 3 feet. It's a really great spreading plant, and it's again great for the pollinators. So I had to add that here. I think it's really important now, as we're realizing how little habitat is left for wildlife and pollinators. I would encourage everybody to incorporate at least some native plants in their gardens, whether they're vegetable gardens or just non-native flower gardens.
Let's start our questions by revisiting a photo question we spoke about last week. These are tomatoes from Tom, who has been having difficulty with tomato seedlings. Bob, any suggestions?
Yeah, we took a look at that. It's a little different, and it obviously wasn't insect or disease. It's right along the veins, and in this particular case, it's a process we call edema. And this is just where that plant is pushing so much water up, and it's we don't have enough ventilation, so we're
Blows
actually
out
getting
the
this.
stomates,
Yeah,
yeah.
The cells are beginning to expand, and lower leaves not a problem, but it can break apart at the tissue line, and then you've got open material that's really where the cells are going to decay. So the solution really is a little bit less watering and then a fan. I think fans are important if you're
Huge.
starting a lot of your own. Let's get some air
Indoors.
movement. Let's get some evaporation. That'll control this edema issue.
And you can take up a lot of those leaves if you have a lot of fresh growth too, because they're going
Right.
to try to fix and repair, and it's just more cosmetic than anything.
Lower leaves can come off. They're not as important, right?
Okay, thanks. Well, let's get on to some viewer questions. Sue is asking, can you grow milkweed in planters?
Oh no,
It's tough.
it's tough because of that taproot.
Taproot.
It's really hard. It's really hard to even transplant milkweed. It's hard to start it. You should seed it where it would grow naturally. Otherwise, transplanting and wintering over is going to be, I would say, impossible.
Okay,
Yeah.
good
It's
question.
a real challenge because of that tap. Yep.
Okay. Brad in Renshaw and Elaine in Virginia have similar questions. They would like to know, is it too early to plant potatoes, onions, and sweet potatoes?
And where were they at? Renshaw? and-
Renshaw and Virginia.
So, right, completely different soil temperatures right now.
Different temperature with great different plants. The onions and potatoes, onions definitely can go in because they're frost resistant. The potatoes, we'll talk about Irish potato. The risk of going this early is that they come up, we get a frost, and then they never really produce like they should. So delay a little bit on the Irish potatoes. The sweet potatoes really delay. They're
way.
very, very warm temperature, and you're going to look at about the third week in June. Very, very late. They do not like 40 degrees. So all different plants, different locations, but
Different soil
other than
temps.
onions, we can wait for all of them, the other two.
All right. Kevin in Deer River has a question that many people have asked. How do I eliminate potato bugs?
Got any ideas there?
Well, I know my dad does. He goes and picks them off. I mean, it's laborious, but that's what he wants to do, and to be, chemical free.
Yeah,
It's tough.
It's really tough.
And rotation.
And even some of the chemical materials, there's a lot of resistance. So I think few plants, 5 or 10, just pick them as rapidly as you can and get rid of them. One thing I've done is I've opened up the soil areas where you can get that snow off. So maybe while you're snow blowing the driveway, this may sound crazy, but snow blow potato patch areas so that the frost penetrates
Goes
and kills
deeper.
the larvae.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Killing two birds with one stone.
if you can.
Yeah.
Yes.
Elena in Duluth is asking, how do you transplant or get rid of lily of the valley because they are taking over the garden?
Well, they're invasive, of course, and they're beautiful, but invasive. And you're just going to have to, if you're going to do it non-chemically, you're just going to have to get a good
Dig
mat
them
out
up.
there, right? Some kind of covering, and just use a carpet or heavy cardboard or something of that nature. If not, you're going to have to use one of the non-selective herbicides like glyphosate or something like that to control them.
Dwayne in Grand Marais has some rain barrels developing some brown slime, and he's wondering if he can put ammonia in it to stop it.
Ooh, okay. Why wouldn't he just put bleach in there?
Yeah.
Like a 10% bleach solution in there and kill that, and then a lot of it will dissipate anyway, and that kills a lot of the algae and a lot of different things. It will. I don't know why he'd want to use the other.
I'm not sure either. I think bleach is a better solution. And 10%, that's not going to be a
Yeah.
problem.
Okay. Marion in Duluth is asking about snow on the mountain. How do I get rid of it or control it from spreading?
Boy, we got a lot of invasives
Always,
again.
always.
Yeah. I think that if you got a garden bed and you want to grow it, then a good barrier, something that, an edging material, a good commercial edging material rather than the cheap, inexpensive plastic stuff, something like that, or a galvanized cord or some type of metal to keep it in place. It's tough because it'll spread
Wants to
very
run.
dramatically. Yeah.
Okay, and Scott in Duluth has 4x8 beds. How deep should my compost layer be before digging into it?
Well,
Topping it, I presume that's what he's saying.
yeah, I think he's got I think 2 to 3 inches is realistic, and then he's going to incorporate it. So compost, that's a good question, really, because compost can be used both on the surface and then it can be incorporated as an amendment. 2 to 3 inches is not too much.
And then he could
better.
amend on top too as a weed barrier too if it's really good, clean compost.
Well, before we get into more viewer questions, Deb, you wanted to cover an interesting topic tonight, right?
Well, going along with the earlier segment on pollinators, and you can also have a lot of pollinators and using more of the some common flowers that you buy at nurseries and things, and you can use them as long as they have a really good physical shape for the pollinators. Like on the screen, a petunia, we have a lot of bumblebees and different bees, native bees that like to come in the greenhouse and get on those. But as far as planting like whole beds, you can group plants together for pollinator protection. Like those sections she had where they're nice and tight and so they can get in and they have protection from other pests. You also need wood for the advantage of the pollinators. Leave at least 12 to 18 inches of hollow stems on the natives or whatever other non-native things you're growing. Add a water feature with rocks and saucers so that the pollinators can get water, especially in the spring. It's really important right now for them to have a water source. And then you really don't need to use a lot of fertilizers because with the clover, they fix the nitrogen, and so a lot of clover is a really good ground cover for a bee garden. And then when we're maintaining it, don't spray. You don't want to spray herbicides, pesticides, fungicides, anything that could contact them. And there's some left on the plants also, so you really don't want to use any kind of spray. And then just use more resistant plants. And when you're planting, don't plant the plant so close that they could get fungal diseases. So a little bit of spacing and not too tight. Avoid pesticides. Try to use more environmentals like spraying them off. If you see a pest, try to eliminate it with a sharp blast from a hose, and you can add soap to it, use a siphon. And then only use it, and if you have to spray, then try to use it only I would like to use it in the evening when it's cool and they're all in, and it can sit on the plant or whatever you're treating longer rather than in the morning. And then when you're growing a garden and you're not sure what to do, start small. We can all do a little bit, and a little bit from everyone would help all pollinators, like those dahlias there with that open face. And dahlias are great because they give you the best of both worlds for an annual. They bloom all summer, and then they also give you a tuber. And so then you can have flowers that are there all summer, especially during the dearth. And then you could create a border around your yard and just be patient with it. Give it some time to mature. Don't overcrowd. And then choose plants and layout carefully in what you use. And if you are doing a whole bee lawn, please contact the city and make sure what the rules are for lawns.
Thank you, Deb. Let's get back to some more questions. Patty emailed us in Hayward and is asking about their decision to not completely remove leaves from their flower beds. Will that be a problem? And we also are not mulching either. Any advice?
I think that's a good thing to leave the leaves.
Yeah, it depends on the amount. If you do not incorporate, do not compost, a thin layer of leaves, no problem. A real thick layer of leaves, as it begins to break down, you get some intermediate material that can actually be troublesome. I'd rather see that composted than the compost return. But a thin layer of leaves isn't going to matter, and it can be used as a mulch, really.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, not applying it, but just not removing it.
Right.
An emailer is asking, where can I get the tree tamarick?
Oh, Byrns
Can't
greenhouse.
find one.
Byrns greenhouse.
There you
Byrns
got
greenhouse.
it.
We have them. We have some nice ones that we got from Boreal Natives.
Yeah.
Boreal Natives comes up and they get our tamaracks and they get our Joe Pye weed. So then they bring us tamarack in the spring. We've got some really nice size ones.
Okay.
Very nice.
There you go.
Perfect. Wendy in Duluth is wondering if the sprays used by local companies to kill mosquitoes are safe for pollinators.
No, that's a good question.
It depends on application and when they're applied and what they're really using.
And
I
where
mean, how
they're
do you
applied.
know what they're using?
Mm-hmm. It depends on the product. So ask the question of your applicator.
Right.
Okay. Margaret is asking about 2 pear trees that were planted a few years ago. One died, and we understand we need 2 different kinds for fruit. We don't remember what kind we planted. How can we get fruit? Margaret in Cloquet.
So she doesn't know what she has, and she doesn't know what died.
Right. I don't think it's going to matter too much because most of those will actually be flowering at similar times. So I'd say get another one. Hardiness is the issue. When she had one that died, so be very careful. Again, work with your dealer and buy materials that are winter hardy for this area, because some are excellent, but other varieties are not nearly hardy enough.
Okay. Carol in White Lakes is asking about a soil test report that says they need fertilizer with no phosphate. Should be 15, 0, 30. Where can I find it?
That's often the problem that people have. You get 3 numbers there, they don't need the middle number. So I would say I always focus on the nitrogen. That's the one you can get the most trouble with. So do your calculations based on a high nitrogen fertilizer, and don't worry quite as much about the potassium. That last number, we can make that up. Actually, that's something she could probably do with a lawn fertilizer, without any herbicides, of course, because there's nitrogen, no phosphorus, and then potassium. The potassium is not going to be as critical as the nitrogen. Work off the first number.
Perfect. Doreen from Duluth is asking, on a scale of 1 to 10, how invasive is evening primrose? 1 to 10, scale of 1 to 10. Let's say 1 is not invasive, 10 is highly.
Right. Well, depends. Do you let it go to, if they're letting it go to seed, you know, and if they're controlling it, do they want it to be invasive or do they not? You know, because you can do a lot of control with eliminating the seed, you know, because that again is a tap. And it, you know, it's not going to run as badly. So if you get to it before it goes completely to seed, that's going to eliminate a lot of it.
Yeah, it's not bad advice. Deadhead early and get rid of some of the seed pods.
Okay, so it can be or not.
It can be managed for sure.
Yeah.
For sure, it can be managed.
So it, you know, 3, 4.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh yeah, number. Yeah.
Kathy in International Falls is asking, how do I get rid of wild pea?
What was it? Wild pea?
Wild pea.
Oh.
Wild pea.
Boy, we got a lot of people who want to get rid of everything. I think they're similar. Once again, if you've got something that's emerging right now, don't let any sunlight get to it. So matting of one type or another is a choice. It's either that or it's some type of an herbicide that you're going to have to use.
Okay. Well, you know, in the last set of questions, someone brought up compost. And speaking of compost, is there something you want to share with us, Bob?
Well, we're big fans of compost because our soils tend to be low in organic material. So consequently, we'd like to get as much compost in as we can, and mention the fact that really you want to just create conditions that favor the bacteria and the fungi that actually create this composting process. Now, compost can be used both as an amendment, and that was the other question we had. You had it up on the soil surface. It can be used as a mulch when it's on the surface. It can be incorporated into the soil, and then it's used as an amendment. So it's multifunctional. There's a nutrient component to it as well as this tilth that's there. So, you know, the big thing, again, going back to that, the basic concept is keeping your workers happy. So you want to create an environment where they're happy doing what their work alone. So you can use temperature as a guide. It's very, very efficient. I'll use a section of rebar in my compost pile. I'll stick it in there and pull it out after 5 minutes. And if it isn't hot, my compost pile isn't working very efficiently. So you want to maintain temperatures. If you're a good composter, 130 to 140 degrees, you can get an actual compost thermometer. They'll give you those specifics. And don't be deceived. It really does take 3 to 6 months to get a mature compost. I talked about too many leaves out there that are incorporated. You don't want immature compost because the process isn't complete. It tends to be acidic. So at least minimum 3 to 6 months for most of us, about 1 year. And then again, think a little bit about the workers, what's doing all the work, the bacteria, as well as the fungi. So what do they need? You need a good feedstock. That's going to be your organic material. You got to have 50% oxygen. So what that means is you don't want a pile that's dense. You don't want to chop it and refine it too much. You don't want to put any soil on there that it compresses it. So my advice is build a loose pile, get some fiber in there, maybe some wood chips or branches so that you get natural incorporation of the oxygen. If it's real dry, then you're going to have to add some water, and just a garden hose is fine. How do you know if it's too wet? 20% water is what we want. Grab that compost, squeeze it hard. You should get a drop or two of water that comes out. That's about 20%. Then this part that's a little tricky, carbon to nitrogen. there's a lot of nitrogen in green materials, so we're incorporating grass clippings, which should be mixed in so they don't compress. But grass or anything green has a lot of nitrogen component. If you have dry material, you got to have nitrogen from some source. And you can even use a commercial fertilizer to supply some of the nutrient, the nitrogen that's needed. So carbon for energy for your bacteria, nitrogen for the proteins that they're going to build. Then their numbers explode, and then the process works very, very efficiently. A lot of fun when it works for you.
Thanks, Bob. Let's wrap things up with a few more viewer questions. We have a viewer that emailed asking, what is a good fertilizer for raspberry and blackberry bushes?
Once again, it's going to be nitrogen. It's going to be this time of year. They don't need it later in the season, so both of those, just a high nitrogen. Again, you could use just a lawn fertilizer, which is high in nitrogen, and the phosphorus isn't there, and the potassium's useful as well.
Kathy in Pequon Lakes is growing huckleberries and is wondering how long it takes to germinate.
Oh, huckleberries.
Oh, huckleberries, and
Yeah.
she's germinating. She's going from seed.
Yeah, that's
wow,
a challenge.
That's a challenge.
And
Cuttings would be much easier if she tried to
Yeah.
start from cuttings, but germinating those seeds, it can take a month, 2 months. I mean, and you don't even know if you're going to have success. It would probably be better if she tried to do a fall seeding, and then she might have better luck once they try to break in the spring and get a little stratification or scarification, so that
winter hardening is going to be another issue. So I would say consider honeyberry if you need something other than our favorite blueberries.
Okay. Janet on Park Point wants to know how to get rid of poison ivy in the sand.
ooh,
Once again, that's a challenge. And I think that resorting to glyphosate to get it out of there. For poison ivy, of course, if you're allergic at all, and most people are, it can be very dangerous. So I think getting out, it's hard to dig, wear the gloves and whatnot, but the re-sprouts in the fall for control, and this is a situation where they might have to use glyphosate, an herbicide, to take it out of there.
Marion in Duluth would like to know how to keep slugs off her hostas.
sluggo, or
Well, yeah, there are some materials
Yeah.
that can be used.
yeah,
Big thing I think on slugs is they're really terrestrial snails, so they like moisture. So things are pretty moist.
yeah, true.
So open it up and try to get a perimeter there where you've got you can put different types of materials that they don't like to cross, including black plastic, which will be hot for them. So you want a barrier around the outside. You want to raise the beds if you possibly can to get better drainage, get rid of some of the moisture, and that will discourage the
And
slugs.
some good airflow in there.
Good airflow.
Good flavor. Yep.
And there are some materials that can be used for control, but be very careful. You don't want to use any of these materials, metaldehyde's the active ingredient. You don't want to use any of those materials around edibles.
Okay. Well, speaking of perennial gardens, what is safe for the plants in the garden? Granules or sprays for weed control? Jane in Duluth is asking.
Well, you can. Okay, so there used to be a school of thought, right, for corn gluten meal. I mean, if
Yeah.
you're really concerned, then really start heavy with corn gluten meal, if that's your number one concern, and that does help with weed suppression. But that can take, for really good weed suppression, 2 to 3 years. But there are more, commercial things available for
Right.
that too.
And a number that are sold for the homeowner. But she asked granules versus sprays. She really wants to know the active ingredient. That's the most important part. So take a good look, read those labels. There are products you could use, but read the label, and then the form. Granular is a little easier so it doesn't drift off into other locations.
Makes sense. Carl in Hayward is asking about coffee grounds. Can you mix them with compost or mix directly in the soil?
Well, coffee grounds are great feedstock. We talked about that for composting. It goes in the compost pile first, and it is a little acidic, but heavy amounts of anything directly applied is not beneficial. So in the compost pile first, and then when it becomes compost, then into the garden.
Okay, and we have someone that emailed and is asking, again, where was the place that I could purchase a tamarisk tree?
We have it at Byrns Greenhouse in Zim, and we've got some beautiful. They're
Byrns.
beautiful. They're absolutely beautiful
Yeah,
because they're nice
native
and
tree.
fresh, and they're so green and light and airy. They are fantastic.
Byrns Greenhouse. All right. Roberta in Duluth in the Crosby area. Buckthorn, how do I get rid of it?
Wow, getting rid of everything. There's an
Buckthorn,
invasive.
there you go.
And you can pull that if you're really working. There are pullers, and so you can really work at it. But other than that, there are some approved materials that can be used where you'll cut them off and then you apply these to the stumps. Or you can cut everything off and then they will re-sprout for you in the fall of the year. The young tender sprouts you can control again with glyphosate, but there are other compounds that can be used.
Well, that's all for Great Gardening tonight. You can follow us on our social media channels on Instagram at Great Gardening PBS North and on YouTube at youtube.com/greatgardening, where you can find tonight's episode posted tomorrow. Once again, we will be taking a couple weeks off, but we'll be back June 8th for an hour-long episode. Thank you so much, Bob and Deb. You were great tonight.
So were you. It was a pleasure, Sharon.
Good job.
From all of us here at Great Gardening, we'll see you next time, and please enjoy the garden.